In 1787, the delegates at Philadelphia faced a question as old as politics itself: who counts and for what? The answer mattered because the new government they were designing would distribute political power based on population. States with more people would get more seats in the House of Representatives, more votes, and more influence. But a nation where nearly one-fifth of the population was enslaved, the question of counting was explosive. For the South, the stakes could not have been higher. Northern states were growing faster, more towns, more trade, more immigration. Southerners feared that if only free citizens were counted, the North would quickly overwhelm them in Congress and the presidency. Virginia's delegation pressed the point. Without enslaved people included in the tally, the South's influence would shrink, and its place in the Union would be permanently weakened. The North saw this for what it was, a bid for more power. If enslaved people were treated as property, bought, sold, mortgaged, and inherited, how could the South also claim them as persons for political representation? To the Northern delegates, it looked like having it both ways. What the South called fairness looked like fraud. The divide was so deep that it threatened to sink the convention itself. Without agreement, the Constitution might never have been written. The compromise that emerged was as cold as it was consequential. 3/5 of the enslaved population would be counted both for representation and taxation. Every 5 enslaved people would add 3 persons to a state's official population count. The first consequence was in representation. In the House of Representatives, seats were apportioned by population. Counting 3/5 of the enslaved population gave the South more members of Congress than it would otherwise have had. That meant more votes on laws, more influence on communities, and more leverage in national policy. Without the compromise, the North's faster-growing free population would have tipped the balance much sooner. With it, the South kept parity for decades. But the compromise also shaped money. Under the Constitution, direct federal taxes were tied to population as well. This created a paradox. The South wanted enslaved people counted when it came to representation, but invisible when it came to taxes. The North wanted the opposite. The 3/5 rule applied to both. That meant Southern states gained extra seats in Congress and reduced their tax liability. They owed less to the federal treasury than they would have if enslaved people had been counted fully. In effect, the North shouldered more of the fiscal burden, while the South gained more political power. Even though direct taxes were rarely levied in practice, the principle mattered. From the very start, the deal gave the South more out of the Union than it put in, and resentment over that imbalance simmered for decades. The compromise also magnified the South's power in the presidency. Representation in the Electoral College is based on the number of congressional seats. By inflating population totals, the South secured more electoral votes than its free population alone would have justified. This tilt was not abstract, it changed outcomes. Thomas Jefferson's victory in the election of 1800, for example, was made possible by the inflated count of enslaved people under the 3/5 rule. Without this, his margin of victory disappears. Thus, the compromise didn't just shape Congress, it shaped the White House. For the South, this was the heart of the bargain. The 3/5 compromise was not just about arithmetic, it was about preventing political eclipse. Without counting enslaved people, the North's growing population would have quickly overwhelmed the South's influence. With the compromise, Southern elites bought themselves time to entrench slavery, time to expand westward, time to protect their way of life with a Union that was slowly turning against it. For the North, accepting this bargain was less about approval and more about survival. Many delegates believed that the Constitution would never be ratified without it. To form a union, they agreed to terms that entrenched division. The number itself, 3/5, was not new. It had been used earlier under the Articles of Confederation as a formula for apportioning taxes. At Philadelphia, some delegates argued for 1/2, others for 3/4. 3/5 was the midpoint that both sides could swallow. It was bargaining, not philosophy. Equally deliberate was the language. The Constitution never used the word slave. Instead, it spoke of other persons. This was no accident. Many delegates, especially from the North, wanted to avoid slavery direct in the nation's charter. They cloaked the compromise in euphemism, creating a constitution that pretended to sidestep slavery while building it into the structure of government. The effects of this were enormous. The 3/5 compromise tilted the balance of power towards the South for nearly 70 years. It shaped debates over tariff expansion and the admission of new states. It secured Southern leverage in Congress and the presidency, protecting slavery from national restriction. This was the South's shield against being politically eclipsed, but it was a shield brought at the expense of national unity, embedding rivalry into the bones of the Constitution. It took a civil war and a constitutional amendment to undo it. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, required that representation be based on the whole number of persons in each state. At last, every person would be counted as one. Today, the Three-Fifths Compromise is remembered not as a triumph of statesmanship, but as a warning about the cost of compromise. It shows how the pursuit of union can entrench injustice, and it reminds us that the Constitution was not born pure. It was born of bargains, some prudent, some tragic. For the delegates in 1787, the Three-Fifths Compromise was a way to keep the South from walking out and the North from walking over them. For history, it became proof that when liberty and power collide, the details struck in the moment can shape a nation's destiny for generations.